In 1989, I got my final report card from high school. I had worked diligently all the way through high school to get as many A's as possible, to give me the opportunity to do as many things as I could and hoped to dream of. I got accepted to the University of California at Berkeley. I got accepted as the only student in Canada in the bioengineering program. One student a year was accepted into a joint program between Berkeley and Stanford that would take you through your undergraduate and into your master's program. I got accepted into that program. It was an honors program. You had to keep a certain GPA, but I'd spent years keeping a certain GPA. I knew how to do that. And I got accepted into the program, and I went to Cal a couple weeks early to get everything situated so that I could achieve as much as I could hope to achieve and deliver as much as I hoped to deliver. And I walked into my very first chemistry lecture. I had taken chemistry AP. I had passed the AP exam with a 5, which meant that I didn't even have to take chemistry 1A. But I took the class, and I sat in a seat like you, looking up at a guy on stage. And I don't know what happened, but I didn't understand a thing. I freaked out. I don't know if it was because he jumped into stoichiometry or if it was something else, but I swear to God, I felt like I had studied forever to get to this point in life, and I was there, and I was sitting in a seat, and it was towards the back because that's where we sit. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, if this is a feeder thing, if they're trying to just get rid of us, then they win because I don't know what he just said. Turned out the professor wasn't a very good lecturer. It wasn't my fault. But I walked into the lab later that week, where you do actual experiments. And I got paired up with someone, and they were way smarter than I was. At 18, you think you're smart. Within 2 hours, I thought, I'm the dumbest kid in this class. And so before the semester ended, I walked into the engineering college. I walked into the dean of engineering, and I quit the School of Engineering. I gave it up because I was terrified that someone would catch that I wasn't the smartest person in the room. I was terrified that someone would figure out that this special program that I had been accepted into, that was only one student a year into this bioengineering special program, that ultimately I would have been a poor choice for them, a wasted cause. So I quit. Went over to poli-sci, then eventually social welfare. I don't know, but I may have been the smartest guy in the room in social welfare. I continued to play with computers, but I graduated in social welfare. I went on to work at a government research lab doing computing because I just couldn't get it out of who I was. I'd been working with and programming computers since I was about 10. But I went and got a job at Berkeley Lab in data entry because I didn't want them to think that I thought I was a programmer and then realize one day that I wasn't as good as they thought I'd be. So I started doing data entry until someone said, couldn't you write some program to automate some of that? So then when they asked, I did it. So what were you waiting for? Waiting for you to ask. I go, can you do any other things? Well, sure, I could do a couple other things. And I did a couple other things and started getting promotions. All of a sudden, I'm leading a team building web development stuff, and only because they asked. I was never willing to put my foot out in front. And I left the lab a couple years later, and I joined a startup, and we started building it up. And within a year, we had developed enough intellectual property as well as value in the business that we sold the company for $10 million. And as we were selling it to a much bigger company, and they asked if I would be the CTO of that company. But they were a real company, a serious company. They weren't a startup. So I quit. Because I could just go back to startup, start another company where, 2 or 3 of us were sitting in a room and we would try to do some things, but at least I wouldn't be with a big company with serious people, and someone would look over and go, you picked that guy as a CTO? He doesn't know what he's doing. I lived in terror, serious, legitimate stress that someone would wake up one day, look over my shoulder at whatever it was I was doing, and say, that's not the best way to do it. And that in that moment, the world would stand up and laugh. So I quit. Went on and did another startup. Did several startups. But honestly, right, between you and me, I have a whole history of moments where I've just quit. Pulled myself out of the mix because if I stood there and you looked close enough, you'd find a semicolon misplaced. You'd find code that doesn't compile. You'd find SQL that wasn't high performant. You would find an architecture that could be improved. You would find a design that wasn't the best. And I didn't want to be there when you caught it. So I just backed up, stepped out. This idea of the impostor syndrome, the idea that we will get caught, the fear that someone's going to realize that we don't know all that they think we know, has just been kind of sitting there permeating inside me for decades. I was sitting at my dining room table a couple of years ago with my wife, and we were talking about the TV shows that we like. I don't know if any of you have ever decided to move from quitting cable to just using Netflix and Hulu and iTunes. Yes? You are all my favorite people. So we were having that discussion, but we were doing it scientifically. We were calculating how much we were paying the cable company every month and comparing it to the monthly recurring revenue associated with those services, but also if we went on iTunes, what it would cost to buy the subscriptions of the shows that we liked best. In order to do that, you need to talk about the shows you like the best. I'm starting to work this through. I don't know if you're going to catch a theme, but my favorite imposter is Dexter Morgan. Do you know Dexter Morgan? Yeah, he's amazing. See, in the middle of his day, he's a blood tech analyst, right? He goes to crime scenes and he evaluates blood splatter and he figures out who did what, when, where, and how. And then, at the end of the day, he checks his bags in, gets in his car, and he goes, finds people, and he kills them. And here's the crazy thing. I like him. They designed the show in such a way that he's the protagonist and someone that you find endearing. Like he's doing a good social service by killing bad guys, but he's still killing people. But he lives a double life. One of my favorite shows. Another one of my favorite shows, and we were calculating, how many favorite shows do we have, and is it going to be cheaper to do this? It turned out it was cheaper. Another one of my favorite shows, Walter White. How many of you know Walter White? If you haven't raised your hand, you should go back and find Breaking Bad and start watching it. But don't blame me when you skip a couple weeks of work. Because I didn't catch it at the beginning. I think they were on like season 4 when a buddy told me about it. And I swear to God, I just watched all day and all night, all weekend. Thank God it was a long weekend because I just kept going. And I'm like, this is amazing. But you know, he was a chemistry teacher. And then he got diagnosed with cancer, and so he's hanging around with his family and being a good family guy, but, you know, in the evenings, he cooks meth. Sometimes has to kill people. And then pour all sorts of special chemicals over them so that they're obliterated and gone from the planet. But you know what? I like him. I don't know how they did the show, but it turns out that he's a protagonist, and I kind of dig him. You know, it's like he's doing a service to community because he's making the percentage go higher and paints it blue. And you're like, he's a good meth guy. But are you catching a theme? Turns out, apparently, the shows that are some of my favorites are shows about people leading double lives. They don't all have to be bad. I don't know if you've ever watched Psych, but there's a guy that has no psychic powers. And he runs the psychic detective agency. And he has no psychic powers. He's just incredibly observant. but he goes through all the mechanics to play like he's a psychic. He's another imposter. Everywhere you look, everywhere we look, we see people leading double lives. You can't help but find the situations where we're acting one way and yet deep down inside feeling another. In 1970, the odds of a child who was born 3 months premature were 50-50. In 1970, if you were born at 7 months, you had a 1 in 2 shot of surviving. And I know because I was one of them. I happened to be born in Arizona, in Tucson, where the university there had a research hospital that had the kind of equipment that gave me the shot at surviving. But the doctor told my parents to quickly have another child because this one would likely be brain damaged. So I have a brother who's 15 months younger than me. I mean, they took that for real. And in 1970, the odds were that, oh, he may survive, and that was 50-50, but the odds of brain damage were much higher. You're just going to have a problem with that child. So I spent the first 5-6 years of my life going to the doctor all the time. And we would go almost every week, and I'd have to play with toys. I didn't know why we would go play with toys at the doctor's office, but they were all tests to see how brain damaged I was. My wife likes to say it this way. She goes, because our daughter is profoundly gifted, and so my wife looks at me and goes, let me just ask you a question for real. How smart do you think you would have been if you were born normally? Well, thank you, honey. I feel so smart. She meant it kindly, but still. I kept going to the doctor, and I got the impression pretty clearly that there's something that could potentially be wrong with me. And so I spent all of elementary school and junior high and high school chasing after what it meant to be performance-oriented and to deliver and to succeed and to meet whatever standard had to be the standard that would allow me to step into the next role and the next thing and just keep doing it, even though deep down inside, I worried there may be something broken. Or there may be something wrong. Or I just may be really good at acting because then when the things work out right, I don't internalize it. See, at the end of the day, the imposter syndrome is simply this. It's the inability to internalize your success. The inability to actually succeed at something, to actually accomplish something, to do something, and still not feel it go deep down inside to the point that you feel satisfied to say, I did that. And when you can't internalize it, you live a life worried, getting caught. And you feel like you're living a double life. Ever heard someone say, that was incredible? And without pausing, without thinking, your response immediately is to deflect? That was incredible. Oh, well, I have a great team. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with admitting that you have a great team or that it was a team effort or that you work together. But if your default, when someone says, that was great, and your response was, look somewhere else, you may want to ask yourself, is this something I'm struggling with? Sometimes someone tells you, you're crazy smart. Now, that has nothing to do with actual intelligence. It really is a statement of, oh my God, you just solved a problem I couldn't solve, which is a comparative thing. Someone tells you you're smart, and what's your response? Oh, if you just look online, you could have found this. I found it. You could find it. I just searched it. You could search it too. And what do? We diminish the work we did. We diminish the experience we have. We diminish the effort that we've taken to deliver that solution, to write that piece, to present that thing, solve that problem, or write that code. We diminish what we've done simply saying, oh, well, yeah, it is a nice design, except it was, I was inspired by this other design who's much better, right? Oh, yeah, well, this code was here, but actually I found it online, and I just appropriated it here and tweaked it a bit. And we point somewhere else. And so you say, oh, I want to be you when I grow up, and you turn around and you're like, oh, you're going to be much better than I am. I mean, when I was your age, I was much worse. You're already ahead. And we deflect to point back to the person talking instead of owning in that moment, well, thank you for that compliment. Thank you. How many of you, when someone gives you a compliment, your first response is, thank you? I can't tell if you're liars or not. Because most of the time, I hear people saying to someone, hey, that's really great, and I hear the deflection all the time. It may be that my ears are tuned to it, right? But sometimes we have a real hard time accepting a compliment. Because what are we thinking inside? Right? Deep down inside, we're going, hey, if you really knew who I was, if you really knew me, well, you wouldn't say that. Right? Which perpetuates this dynamic of putting on some sort of facade. Or we say, hey, you know what? Any minute now, they're going to figure out I don't know what I'm doing. One of our startups we sold, and I stepped into the role of the chief software architect into a bigger company, a much bigger company, and earning a lot more money. And I had to be one of those guys that went on the road to raise more venture capital. And so we were doing this stuff, and I would go sit in these rooms with venture capitalists, and we would talk through technology and architecture and the stack and everything else. And every time I went into that room, I just thought, they're going to ask questions I don't know. They're going to ask stuff I can't answer, and they're going to catch that at some moment, that whatever they imagined when I walked in that room, it was a complete lie. They're going to find me out. And I would just stress. I would just be sweating. And I don't know, it's difficult for you to imagine because I always wear a t-shirt, but there was a period of life where I wore suits every day. And I'd go from the Bay Area down to Sand Hill Road, and I'd wear these suits, and I'd go into these venture capitalist office, and I would pitch deals and raise capital. And as we were doing it, do you know what it looks like to be a large Latino in a tie, sweating profusely for hours before you meet for a 15-minute appointment? Tonight, when you're about to fall asleep, I want that to be the image that you take away from all of today. Just kidding. Just kidding. Don't do that to yourself, really. But I was just sweating. I was dying because they're going to, and it turns out they never did. And in fact, the one or two times that they asked a question that I really didn't know, it was one of those things that was so far off field that there was not even a chance I would know. And I just looked at them and said, no, I don't know. I don't know that. They're like, okay, it was just, chance. And the world didn't explode. And nobody laughed, and nobody got up, and no one walked out. Like, wow, I didn't imagine it working that way. So what do we tell ourselves? I'm just really good at faking it. We have this phrase that we hear, and I understand there are certain times where it's really positive to say fake it till you make it, especially if you're talking about, like, say, entering into the WordPress community, and you're like, I don't know much, and you're like, just act like you belong. Don't stress about it. Just act like you belong. Walk into the room, hang out, and get connected, and eventually you will feel connected. And when you say it that way, I think it makes perfect sense. But when you say it as in, I'm going to take a new job, and I don't know what it is, and I'm just going to act like I know it until I figure it out, there's something disingenuous about it. But more than that, we're feeding an internal lie that says I have to actually put on a facade. I actually have to do and be someone I'm not. Instead of just being honest and saying there's things I know and I'll bring that to the table, and there's things I don't know. And I hope that I bring more to the table than the stuff that I don't know, and I hope you could teach me, and I hope I learn fast. At the end of the day, I participated in several different startups. We had several different exits. In any definition of success in the startup world, you'd say, hey, good job. And my response over and over was, I was just lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. I got onto some good teams, and we had some good luck. I was born in the right year, graduated in the right year, ended up being in the right place, and went to the right things and participated in the right stuff, but it was lucky. When in fact, I put a lot of effort into the stuff I was doing. So how do we work through this? Right? Just the right place, right time. Well, the first thing is, You have to tell yourself that you no longer want to have this kind of inner monologue in your world. I'm not saying the feelings go away, but when the self-talk comes, when the negative self-talk comes, it needs to just stop. You just need to put a pause on it. Because the more you talk to yourself negatively about yourself, there will be consequence. I've said it before, the way you think about the way you think impacts the way you think. So you need to tell yourself, we got to stop this. If not, you end up with a train wreck, right? And here's the bad part about a train wreck. Here's the challenging, difficult part that we don't think of, because we think this is just between ourselves and the mirror. But when you set a bar that is so ridiculously high for yourself, you set the same bar ridiculously high for the people around you. And you create unreasonable expectations that cause people to work all day and all night just to keep a job. You can't live in that world. We wear the I only slept 3 hours a night like a badge instead of a scarlet letter. We can't create an ecosystem that requires everybody to be perfect all the time, to know everything all the time. And it starts with letting yourself off the hook. And as you do, watch as you start letting other people off the hook, giving them a little bit of grace. Because you need time with family, or you need time to take a break, or you need a hobby. You just go take a break and we'll start again tomorrow. The train wreck isn't just going to be your life, it's going to be the people around you too. And we don't think about it that way because we think this is just going on between me and me. That's not the case. So what I want to do with the last bit of our time is just walk you through a couple of steps I'm working through. I'm sorry, but I cannot tell you that I am at the end of the journey and all complete and I figured it all out and now I'm just talking about stuff that happened in years gone by. It is still an effort, a diligent discipline to work through it every day for me. And yet, I'm far enough along to at least have found some tools, some approaches that help. And the first, right, is to just say, yeah, I have this issue. I have a fear about what I know and what I don't know, an unwillingness to internalize the success of what I've done, and an inability to receive a compliment or to even admit to, yes, I worked hard and I got that done. And no, I don't know that answer, and I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to take a risk and be honest about where I'm at today. And the first step is you just have to admit, A, I have a problem, and B, I got to start being more honest. I have to start embracing the reality that I'm not Superman. I can't do everything. And it's going to be okay. The second thing is you need to have some friends that have perspective. If you don't have friends that have perspective because you're in an entire community of people that are all racing down the same game, go somewhere else to get perspective. I was living in the Bay Area, I was part of the startup community, and I moved 60 miles east to get out of a race I didn't want to run in. And when that wasn't far enough, I left Northern California and moved to San Diego on purpose, where I wear flip-flops all the time and haven't seen a tie. I'm not sure my daughter knows what a tie is. You step out of the race because it's not helpful and because that's where you find perspective. Find some friends, and I'm not saying you have to move. Find some friends that will give you perspective and say, no, you're really actually quite good at that. And that you should never do again. And don't ever wear that out in public. You need those friends. Talk about it. One of the commitments I made 2014 was that I was going to be more honest publicly and to talk about it more publicly. And whether it's on this stage or it's just hanging out with a group of friends or in my local communities where I have impact, to be honest about the fact that most of us are running around with a facade up and that we don't have to do that. That we can honestly say, these are some of the things I'm good at, these are some of the things I suck at, and these are the things I'm scared that you're going to find out, and eventually I'm going to get too exhausted to hold up the facade, and I don't know what's going to happen when that ends. And you just have to let it go. And so you say, okay, I need to start talking about it, because if I'm not talking about it, you're not going to talk about it. And if I have the opportunity to get on a stage, I'm going to talk about it from the stage so that someone else somewhere else will hear it and go, okay, I can get that. And I want to work through that. One of the things that we're scared to do when we live in this context of feeling like an imposter is we stop asking questions. We stop asking questions because we don't want to admit that there is something that we don't know. How many of you have ever been on a phone call with a client where they ask you about something, some technology, some approach, some company, and while you're answering, instead of saying, I've never heard of that, you open up a Google tab and start Googling it so that you can act like you actually know what they're talking about while they're still asking the question. You don't have to raise your hands. I know you all do it. Because I do it too. Instead of just saying, I've never heard of that, but let me look it up and see if it sounds like something I've worked with. Oh, actually, I've never worked with that, but it sounds just like this, and I have worked with that. Oh, it's a tiny difference in answer, but it's remarkably freeing to be more honest about reality. Instead of having to play up there was a point in 1995 when we were working with the web where legitimately I could know enough about TCP and IP and TTLs and DNS and HTTP and HTTPS and HTML. There was no CSS, and there wasn't even ASP, and I could know enough about these things. There was a blinking text, that was super cool, and I could know enough about these things that I could do everything. That the expanse and the extent of knowledge in the web was something I could get my arms around. That was in 1995. Some of us act like we're still trying to do that, and the stack is so large, our arms aren't long enough. We tell ourselves the lie that our customers want us to be a one-stop shop. That is not the case. Our customers want the delivery of fantastic and amazing things at the price they can afford, whether you do it, or you and a friend do it, or you and a friend and a stranger do it, or whether you use a different technology to do it, is immaterial to a business person's objective. And we act like we have to know everything. And we can't. And anytime we act like we do, we're not hurting just ourselves. We're impacting all the rest of the community to communicate to them that they have to as well. And it's impossible. There's no way that works. So you have to ask questions publicly, if possible. Hey, does anybody know how to do X? Does anybody know about Y? And you'll get some immediate responses in whatever context you're in. And there may be a moment where you think, I can't believe I just asked that question in public. Other people are going to think I'm a moron. Right until the next person pops in and says, hey, thanks for asking that. I was about to ask that too. Because you're not the only one that doesn't know everything. Do me a favor, look to your left. Look to your right. None of them know shit either. There, I just made it easy for you all. Most of us, when we get involved in the community, we're always looking at someone in front of us. I have Alex King sitting right in front of me. How many of you, when you first started, had Alex King in front of you when it came to stuff with the web? Yeah, it's too many, I can't count. Okay, so here's the thing. Alex was doing all these amazing things. If I judge my ability and my skill and my knowledge based on what he knows, I am always going to be less. But here's the crazy thing. If I ask Alex if he knows everything under the sun, there is someone in front of Alex. And whoever's in front of Alex, that person is looking at someone else. And they're looking at someone else. And there's always someone else in front of us that knows more. But what we rarely do is turn around and look backwards at how long the line is behind us of people who actually don't know as much as we know. Even if you've only been using WordPress for 6 months, you know more than thousands of other people. If you've been using WordPress for 2 weeks, you know more than thousands of other people. Because WordPress is growing at such an impressive rate, and it's growing on the fringes, and these people are stepping into the community and they know nothing, and you, with 2 weeks of experience, think, I'm useless, I don't know a thing. You know 2 weeks worth of material more than someone else, and they're dying to hear it. And you will do better off by turning and looking behind you than looking in front of you. You will do better to turn behind you and teach the next person behind you. And you will feel better about yourself, and you will be able to say, I'm good at X, and I'm not so good at Y. And that's just the fact of the matter. There is no value judgment when we say, I can give back to the community, I can give back to certain parts of the community, and there are other parts of the community that someone else is going to have to give back to, because I'm not there yet. Does that make sense? Lastly, the reality is there is things that you do. There are things you've accomplished. You've had some success. My favorite thing you can do, my favorite advice I give to you is go get a LinkedIn account. I'm not telling you to get a LinkedIn account because it's an amazing social network. I'm telling you to get a LinkedIn account because it forces you to write down each job you've had. It forces you underneath it to describe, and I suggest you describe accomplishments, things that have actually occurred while you were in the presence of that employer. And then you get to do something else. You get to pick a whole bunch of people that you know and say, hey, do you want to recommend me for anything? Here's the beautiful thing. None of us would do that in person. None of us would walk up to someone and say, hey, Brian, can I ask you a favor? Can you tell me how awesome I am? If you're that person, I want to meet with you afterward because I just want to hear how that works for you. Most of us would never go, hey, Brian, do me a favor, just tell me how awesome I am. But on LinkedIn, I can say, oh, let me connect to Brian. Great, Brian. And I connect, and then I say, oh, here's a list of 20 people. Let's send it out. I'm not asking. LinkedIn's asking. LinkedIn is saying, hey, Brian, do you have anything you want to say about Chris? And Brian can say either, yes, I do. I just worked with him. That's fantastic. Or he can say, I've seen the guy at a couple camps. I don't know him from Adam. And he ignores the email. And it doesn't impact me at all. But you know what starts to happen? People start actually responding. People start sending you in quotes. And you start reading themes of what you actually have done well. Things you've actually accomplished for people. It may not be what you thought you were good at, so you should get a little bit of personal reflection time. But you start reading what other people say, no, you're really good at that. You really helped me with that. And you need to learn to internalize that stuff and be able to say, actually, this is how I normally help people. Does that make sense? At the end of the day, I can't tell you all the solutions. I can't tell you all the ways to fix this problem. I can tell you that what you should do is find your own way. If you can't, from any of the tips I've just given you, if none of those work for you, then create your own way. This is the free pass to say, go figure out a way to be honest in a local community in a way that allows you to be free from the need to hold up the facade. A few months ago, I created a private hip chat. Other than the fact that HipChat doesn't let me support multiple accounts on the same stupid GUI, I love HipChat. And I created something called the Independent WP HipChat. And I went and I invited a whole bunch of independent WordPress folks. People you may know, some people you don't know. But I called up Norcross and Pippin and Justin Satan and Carrie Dills and a handful of others that were all independent, Bill Erickson and Jared Atchison. And I said, hey, do you want to participate in a hip chat? Because there are these other cool and amazing companies, and they all have their own private company hip chats, but none of you have one, and I don't have one, and I do this in my spare time, so it's not like I'm going to invite you into the emphasis one, but, you know, do you want to participate in this? And they all said, sure. So we did. And we're in there every day. You know what's amazing? When you're in a private community, where the door's closed, you can be honest. And you can start seeing over time people starting to ask questions like, hey, did I charge too little for this? Or does anyone know what this thing does, what this statement does? They wouldn't do that publicly because they're like, I don't want anyone to know. And you're like, no, but you can start here. And over time, what you discover is a whole group of people who can be more honest about what they know and what they don't know. And then you start helping each other. It cost me $22 a month. Best $22 a month I've ever spent. To have a community of people where we're being honest all the time. My name's Chris Lema. You can find me at chrislema.com. Find me online at Chris Lema. And I am in process of recovering imposter. Thank you. I think we have a little bit of time for questions before we get kicked out of this room. I'll try and answer it if you have one. Someone? Yeah?
I'll share what I do. I'm 74.
Sure.
And I have 200 medals in senior Olympics. And I have them on a railing behind the bedroom door because I don't want to brag about them. But I look at them every morning and I remember how easy and how much fun I had having that success. And it gets me out the door because I'm still working and I'm still learning.
That is awesome. Congratulations. Yeah?
I'd first like to pay you a compliment because that was an amazing talk.
Thank you.
Last year,
I have a really great team. I was really lucky. Right place, right time.
last year I saw you talk at Gangplank, and you're talking about developing virtual teams then, and I'm on the cusp of developing my own virtual team right now. And I just thought I'd share an experience that I had recently. I hired a business coach to help me out, and one of the first things that he told me was to start looking forward and not look back. And he drew this little symbol that was a sideways triangle with a curve that looked like a little eye. And I was like, oh my God, that's Chris Lema's logo. And so I feel incredibly privileged to be encouraged because I do suffer from impostor syndrome myself. And just thank you so much for the talk.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? If not, thank you very much. Oh, Alex, yeah? I don't know. Whatever question you have, I don't know.
How do you avoid sounding like a dick?
How do you avoid sounding like a dick?
Yeah, when people say, great job, and you say, thanks.
Yeah. So I think there is a way to accept a compliment and say thank you, right? And still then highlight, because it's really an internal thing, right? How do you accept it first and then highlight? Now, this was, if it was a team effort, right? Or, this is actually, I do a lot of public speaking, and someone say, that was amazing, you made it look really easy. I'm like, it takes me 6 weeks, right? So just so you know, right, there's actually a lot more work, and that's not bragging, it's just to say, it does take work to get here, right? And if you want to do that, then this is what you got to do, and some people are like, oh, then no, I'm going to leave. But I think you can accept a compliment and still not look like a jerk, and if there are other people to thank, by all means do, right? I'm not suggesting that you never say, these guys are part of it too, because that would make Jason pretty angry. All right, thanks. Get out of here. We'll see you later. Have a great work camp.